Hey guys, Matthew here, and today I'll bring you episode number 2 of Abusing Harvest, and we will be focusing on chess pieces. Now the thing about chess pieces, unlike boots, is that there are quite a few variants. There's actually going to be 4, which we'll cover in this video, so it's not going to be as short as I'd like it to be, but I'll try to do my best to keep it as short as possible. First thing to note is that when I personally craft a chess piece, I pretty much only craft on astral plates because of the all elemental resistance implicit, which just makes it, a 36 more resistance chess piece over any other chess piece in the game, basically. So, pretty much always going to be crafting on a strength-based armor, which is going to make it also a little bit easier in terms of prefixes, because there's not a whole lot of prefixes which which would be problematic. The only real thing that we don't want to get on Explode chess piece is reflect, because it has a physical tag, and that is like the worst thing possible. If you do get that, you're pretty much boned, because if you try to remove it, it is basically a 50-50 between removing either the reflect or between removing the enemy's kill explode, which is your desired and pretty much one of the rarest mod in the game. So that would suck. It's not going to happen very often. As you can see, the weighting is 4,000, and there is like 20,000 or near 25,000 weighting of any other prefixes. So it's fairly unlikely to show up, but when it does show up, it kind of sucks. Now, in terms of suffixes, strength does show up fairly often. As you can see, it has the most weighting of all the other suffixes, and that is a problem because there is no way of getting rid of strength. So one thing to remember when I'll be talking about those chess pieces and the steps where I say remove any stats you don't want, if you are awakening prefixes, such as in the example number 1, which I'll be getting over in a sec, if you awaken 2 prefixes and you get something like strength or stun and block recovery, or reduced attribute requirement, etc., etc., remember that it is always possible to simply craft on prefixes cannot be changed, which is a suffix, and scouring the item. By doing so, you will remove any suffix on your item and keep the desired prefixes, so you can work from suffixes from scratch. But while this does cost you 2 exalts, it saves you from rolling chess pieces with, say, stun, block recovery, or attributes requirement, or even strength, or anything that are not desired stats. Now, if you get, say, physical damage reduction, or if you get regen life or stuff like that, those are all mods which we'll be able to get rid of later by using things such as prefixes cannot be changed, and then either annulling this mod, or by doing, say, change a non-fire modifier to a fire modifier. For example, if I had prefixes cannot be changed and I did that with just additional physical damage reduction, now I would have a 50% of my prefixes cannot be changed of being changed into fire resistance, but I would also have a 50% chance of my additional physical damage reduction being changed as fire resistance. So depending on how many open suffixes I have to play with, these can all be basically ways to save your chess pieces from basically, not being able to work with them. So just a quick note at the beginning, because you'll see that in the document there's a lot of remove any stats you don't want, and for the most part that is how you do that. If you can, simply just remove the modifiers. For example, if you roll percent armor and a stun and block recovery, you can just remove a defense modifier and it's no longer a problem. But the ones without tags, or tags that are not supported by the harvest mechanic, those ones tend to suck, and are a little bit more expensive to get rid of, but they tend to be worth it. So you'll see that I made 4 filters here. These filters basically are showing off near perfect chess pieces. This is probably how I made about 2 of my current 10 mares, is crafting chess pieces. So how you're going to craft chess pieces, basically, is going to be all listed here. There are 4 variants, 3 of which are explode variants, one of which is a non-explode variant. So when it comes to crafting those, you'll see that the filters, I actually made them in a very specific way, and I'll be linking these filters in a pinned comment in the comment section, which are basically how I made the filters is exactly the step-by-step method of actually crafting the chess piece. So you'll see that for all of these different links, there's 4 different variants. There is the 2 mod at the top, which are basically the mods that you want to awaken. Then there are the mods you want to force, and finally there are the mods you want to either craft or force. So for example, if I was to check out this chess piece, you'll see that there's a few of them that already exists. I'm looking for Explode and Additional Curse, which would be what I would awaken here. Additional Curse and Explode are both prefixes. And then you could go ahead and force the attacks of crit by forcing on an attack modifier. Given the fact that this is a Crusader and Hunter influence, if I go here and I type in attack, you'll see that the only things with attack tags from the Hunter and Redeemer and Crusader influence is literally only attacks of crit chance. So I can just augment a new attack modifier, and if I get T2, I can just remove and re-add an attack modifier until I get my desired tier 1. Followed by that, we have a chance to gain a power charge on crit. Now, if I was to look for this mod here, power charge on crit, you'll see that the only mod that it leads to is a chance to gain a power charge on crit, which is a Crusader affix, which is a suffix with a critical tag. Now, if we look for the critical tag, we'll see that there is a few different critical tags available. From the Crusader, there is the power charge on crit, but we also have the Hunter with attacks have crit and spells have crit. So how do we make sure to be able to get the power charge on crit without getting, say, attacks of crit or spells have crit, because critical strike augments are fairly expensive? Well, the first step is going to be to basically get the T1 attack crit by rolling the attack mod until we have the first tier 1. And once we have T1 attacks have crit chance, we are going to craft cannot roll caster modifier, which is a mod that costs 5 blessed orbs. You'll see the cannot roll caster modifier has a caster tag, which doesn't really have any importance here. But what does have an importance here is that the harvest mechanics actually respects metamods. A metamod is basically a mod that you put on with your crafting bench. As you can see, spells have critical strike chance is a caster modifier. Therefore, by putting on cannot roll caster modifier, which is a suffix by the way, and augmenting a new critical modifier, the only outcome can be power charge on critical strikes. So, in which case we would have our T1 attacks of crit and power charge on crits with our initial explode and curse, meaning at this point we have all the 4 different stats here. Now, how we're going to finish this chess piece off is kind of up to us. For the most part, you could actually decide to just craft a double resistance, which is what I was personally doing, because that would basically block out your last suffix, meaning once you go ahead and augment a new life modifier or reroll life modifier, there is no chance that you will hit this regen suffix. So you could simply craft a double res, say cold and lightning for example, it doesn't really matter. You could also augment a chaos modifier if you wanted to. If you go ahead and look at chaos modifier, you'll see that there is only this chaos prefix here of physical damage from hits taken as chaos. So if you do want to aug a chaos modifier to get chaos resistance, you need to remember to block a prefix. Otherwise, you will roll this mod. And given the fact that chaos augments are fairly expensive, you don't want that to happen. So if you had explode and additional curse, which was our starting point, those are 2 prefixes. If you have an open prefix, make sure to craft anything from the bench so that when you augment your chaos modifier, the only outcome will be chaos resistance. So you could actually do that, or you could go with a double craft from the bench of elemental resistance, such as say cold and lightning, and at which point you would have no open suffixes left, because you would have your power charge on crit, your attacks of crit, and your double resistance, and your prefixes would be explode and also additional curse. So what you can do at that point is augment a new life modifier if you don't have any already, or remove and re-add life modifier until you get tier 1 or tier 2 or tier 3 whatever life. I was personally keeping anything over 100 life, because you can craft up to 85, which is around tier 5, so you can actually get like 2 tiers higher, and it's fairly decent. So the end result will be a chess piece that looks something like this. This guy has T2 life, power charge, additional curse, attacks of crit, explode, and double resistance. I was selling these chess pieces for a hell of a lot more than that when I was making them, but that is because I was making them before it was more known. That being said, even if you were to make one of these right now, it would cost you way, way, way less than 48 exalts. It really depends on the price of the power charge on crits, because the additional curse and the explode are basically guaranteed. Chances are you're not going to roll this modifier. If you do, though, you have to annul, which is really, really bad. Well, you have to remove a physical modifier, which is a 50-50, I should say. The life is just a question of rerolling it. The attacks is 1 in 2 chance of getting tier 1 versus tier 2. So on average, will take you 1 augment and 1 reroll. And the power charge on crit is guaranteed if you put on cannot roll caster modifiers. So it is a fairly easy chess piece to make. So that'll be variant number 1. As you can see here, we awaken or explode and curse, remove any stat we don't want. We want explode and curse, 2 open suffixes and an open prefix. Sorry, 3 open suffixes. It's very important to have 3 open suffixes. Well, you could actually do 2 by rolling the power charge on crit first. So if you have 3 open suffixes, you'll be able to force on the attacks and then force on the power charge by crafting cannot roll caster modifiers. That being said, let's say you roll a resistance on your chess piece on the Awakener orb and you want to keep that resistance. What you can do is do cannot roll caster modifier and force on the power charge on crit and then finish off with the attack crit. The order of operation doesn't really matter. It really comes down to how many open suffixes you actually have. Then we remove the life until we're happy. It's a 1 in 16 to get tier 1 when it comes to a life roll. So 1 in 16 to get tier 1 life. We craft our double resistance or augment any roll of specific resistance, such as I already explained, and that is chess piece number 1. Chess piece number 2, there's not much to say about it. It is the exact same thing, except we go with caster, so which means spells have critical strike chance instead of attacks have critical strike chance. And you could also, instead of using an astral plate in this case, use a Val Regalia because, you know, it would have extra additional energy shield. That being said, I would still go with a life-based chess piece because additional curse and explode are prefixes, meaning you only have 1 prefix opened. So the problem with that is that if you had an actual, a Val Regalia with a defense modifier, you would have, let's say, 100 energy shield. I think having flat 100 life is better than this 100 flat energy shield because you can't multiply that energy shield by the percent multipliers that are available on ES chess pieces because you already have 2 open prefixes which are taken by the explode and the additional curse. So the process is the exact same. You'll do the exact same thing except that instead of forcing on mana cost, instead of forcing on attacks of crit, which is an attack modifier, we will force on the spell crit before. Now the thing is, this is a caster modifier, so again, if you have 3 open suffixes, you can start with the caster modifier. You can start with the spells of critical strike chance. If you have only 2 open suffixes because you have resistance or so, put on cannot roll caster modifier and get your power charge on crit on there before, and then you can finish off with rerolling the spell crit by doing augment caster modifier, remove caster modifier. As you can see, there are no other caster modifiers on chess pieces at all, except for the spells of crit. So we can remove and re-add until we get tier 1, which is going to take, on average, 1 augment and then 1 reroll. Pretty easy to achieve there. So that'll be basically chess piece number 2. Chess piece number 3 is a little bit of a different variant. We are moving on to mana cost chess pieces. We're still using explode, so this is a explode plus mana cost. We are going to awaken explode, which is a prefix from Crusader, and all elemental resistance, which might sound a little bit weird. But the reason we do that is because the tier 1 all elemental resistance from the Warlord influence is 16 to 18 on top of the astral plate having 12, meaning 30 all resistance on a chess piece. It is pretty fantastic. So it is a very solid modifier. Now, I'm not a fan of of awakening a prefix as well as a suffix together, because if one of these go wrong, be it the prefix going wrong or the suffix going wrong, you kind of end up in a place where you're kind of fucked. Because you have to decide either removing all the prefixes or all the suffixes, or going for some YOLO and nulls, stuff like that. So I'm not a fan of it, but due to the fact that this leave mechanic allows us so much freedom in terms of being able to remove and re-add modifiers, it makes it much easier to actually achieve. So I was personally awakening explode and all elemental resistances, making sure that my prefixes were good, and if my suffixes were really bad and I wasn't able to remove them with the leave mechanic, I would simply put prefixes cannot be changed and annul them. I would lose the all res, but 18 all res is fairly comparable to, say, a T1 elemental roll, so you can always just get another elemental resistance instead at the very end of the craft. So a chess piece would look something like this. Socketed to have mana cost. Here he has T2 life, T1 all res, T1 res, explode, and then crafted life and mana. So these are your 6 modifiers. These prices are not all that horrible given the chess pieces that we're looking at, but they're still, in my opinion, too expensive. You can make those for cheaper than that. So the process would be to awaken, explode, and all res. You remove any stat you don't want. The goal is to have explode and all res suffix plus 1 open suffix, and you can keep life as prefix or resistance as suffix. So if you awaken an orb and you happen to get any tier of life, you can keep that because you'll be able to reroll it later. And if you get a resistance roll, you can also keep that because, as you can see, we want a single resistance roll somewhere on there anyways. Now, after that, we will force on an attack modifier. The only potential outcome from attack modifier on this specific chess piece, since we don't have Hunter Influence to roll the crit or anything like that, is going to be socketed attacks have mana cost. Has reduced mana cost. So that's what we're going to get, meaning we have explode, all res, and mana cost at this point. Then we will force on our desired resistance by augmenting cold, fire, or lightning, such as this guy who did cold. And then we reroll the life until we're happy. It's a 1 in 16 to get tier 1 life. And then we will finish off the craft by putting either percent life or mana, or sorry, not percent life or mana, but life and mana with the bench, as you can see here. So these is exactly how these chess pieces were made, step by step. Again, I'll be putting each of these links in the pinned comment section of the video, so you guys can basically just know, just by looking at the filter, exactly the step-by-step guide, because it will be in order. And the final chess piece we want to look at is a non-explode variant, which is a curse mana crit chest. This is probably where I made most of my currency when it comes to crafting chess pieces. Also, sorry for the notifications. I keep forgetting to turn these off for the videos. This one's going to be a little bit different. So this one is basically a non-explode chest, meaning we don't go Crusader. We're actually going Hunter and Warlord. So how we're going to do number 4 is we're going to awaken additional curse and all elemental resistances, which is a prefix and a suffix. Then, as always, we remove any stats we do not want. The goal is to have curse, all res, 2 open suffixes. In this case, we need 2 open suffixes, meaning if you have any suffix other than all res, you gotta get rid of it somehow. So annuls, prefixes cannot be changed, scour. It doesn't really matter how you go about it, but you need 2 open suffixes because we are going to be forcing 2 attack modifiers on there. If you get life, flat life, or percent life as prefixes, which is possible due to the fact that we have a Hunter Influence, which can roll percent life, or flat life, you can go ahead and keep those modifiers. Fortunately for this one, there's a lot of open prefixes because we're only using one influence prefix, which gives us the ability to roll percent life and flat life, which is nice. Next, we're going to force on an attack modifier. If we go ahead and look at attack modifiers here, we'll see that there are 2 different outcomes. We can get either socketed attacks or attacks of critical strike chance. Now, if you get the mana cost first, go ahead and reroll that until you get the attacks have critical strike chance, and you want to get T1. So let's say you get socketed attacks of mana cost, you want to remove attack modifier and add a new attack modifier, and then you'll do that until you have T1. And then you will augment a new second attack modifier, which is going to be guaranteed to be socketed attacks of minus mana cost. Meaning at that point you would have your 3 suffixes, attacks of crit, elemental resistances, and socket attacks of mana cost. Now the reason why we don't want to keep socketed attacks have a mana cost if we get this roll first is because if we get this roll first on the first augment of attack modifier and we keep it, and then we augment a new one and we get unlucky and we get T2, we'll have to do remove attack modifier and add a new attack modifier. The problem with that is there is a chance that it's going to hit your socketed attacks, and what would happen is if it hits your socketed attacks is that it will basically not change. It will remove socketed attacks, but then it will re-add it, and you'll just be losing currency. So personally, what I was doing is I was making sure to get my socketed or my T1 attacks of crit chance, and then I was forcing on socketed attacks of mana cost at the very end. And then what I would do afterwards, if you have no open prefixes, or sorry, no other prefixes than your curse, is you can craft on hybrid life to basically block it. So if we look at life modifier here, we have all this flat life, but we also have this hybrid life here. But if you craft on a hybrid life mod on your bench, any hybrid life, it blocks every other hybrid life in the game, which allows you to basically be guaranteed to get one of those, or to get this % life from Hunter, which is also quite decent if you get tier 1. If you get T2, you can craft just as much, so you don't want to be keeping T2 from Hunters, because you'll be able to bench off to bench 8% anyways. So you'd much rather have a high % flat and benching 8% than say have a 12% and then crafting 85 life on there. It looks a lot more attractive when you have the higher life rolls. So, you'd augment a new life modifier after crafting your hybrid, which would guarantee you to get pretty much this or the %. Now, depending on the roll you get, so if you get a bad roll that you're not intending to keep, you want to remove the bench mod. If you forget to remove the bench mod and you do remove life modifier, add new life modifier, and say you had a crappy roll of like 30 or 39 or something, and then it rolls on T1 % life, you are going to be quite sad, because at that point you have to remove and re-add, and there's a 50% chance that it hits the bad roll, but there's also a 50% that you lose your good roll. So you'll be wanting to remove life modifiers to be able to re-aug afterwards. So remember to remove the hybrid life craft after the initial augment new life modifier, no matter what the outcome is, unless of course you get a crazy good outcome, and then you can just craft on the 8% life and mana from the bench. So reroll life modifier until you're happy with it, craft % and life and mana on the bench, and that is your last chess piece. This, in my opinion, is probably the ones that I made the most currency on. They're absolutely not worth 150x. They're worth, when I was making them, about 40x, but as you can see, the prices went down on that as well, because they became easier and easier to make as more and more people were getting the mods and more people were understanding how to actually craft them. Overall, these chess pieces will, on average, probably cost you about 20-ish exalts to make each, except the ones that have power charge on crit, which is the explode variants of the 2 first ones. Because that mod alone is probably like 5 to 10 exalts now. Due to the buff that they recently gave yesterday, these modifiers are much more likely to show up, so they're going to be going down in price, but they're still more expensive than any other augments. So that's pretty much it. I'll be doing a copy paste of this as well in the comment section, as well as the links to all these 4 different variants. So you guys can have fun crafting these pretty cool chess pieces. Because if you wanted to craft one of these in standard or any previous league, they would be either impossible or would have cost you basically thousands of exalts to actually achieve a 6 tier 1. And now we're talking about a chess piece that'll cost you anywhere from 20 to 30 exalt to complete. So pretty ridiculous indeed. So have fun with those. Make yourself a sick chess piece for your build. And before I end the video, as always, I do want to say a huge thank you to my supporters: Gikona, KFish, Zachary, Luro, Scott, Dr. Radu, Casticus, Francesco, Amazo, Skorov, MrCoffee, and finally Mario, as well as anybody else who wishes to remain anonymous. and of course anybody else who supports me on other platforms or who has supported me in the past. Love you guys. Hopefully you learned a little something, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.